Okay, welcome, kia ora koutou, and welcome to this Fireside Chat. I'm here with Paul Brislen, and we are going to debunk the myths surrounding the shutting down of the 3G network today. So, having this has come about after I put something out challenging the government and telcos to do more to support communities who are going to be impacted by the shutdown of 3G. And Paul quite rightly called me out very nicely in the nicest possible way and so there's a lot happening in the background you don't know about, Vic. So he's here to share those insights. Quickly, before I welcome Paul, this webinar will be recorded and it'll be available online on Monday, I would say. And we have the Q&A function. So you're most welcome to ask Paul questions, which I'll facilitate passing on to him during the next 45 minutes via the Q&A. But welcome, Paul. It's really cool to have you here. Thanks for
Thanks for
joining me.
inviting me. No, more than my pleasure. I'm always happy to talk tech. You know that.
Yep, sure do. So why don't you start by introducing yourself? Who is Paul Brislen and what does he do?
There's a question. Kia ora, everyone. My name's Paul Brislen. I am currently the chief executive of the Telecommunications Forum. But in a previous life, I have been a journalist covering the sector. I joked the other day that I started in the telco sector on the 1st of January 2000 because I'd been covering Y2K and there wasn't really much call for it after that. So I had to find a new round. So telecommunications has been at the heart of it. I've worked for Vodafone. I worked for 2Ans for a while as the chief executive there. And generally, I potted around the technology sector for about 25 years. Don't ask me to fix anything, but I can introduce you to a lot of people who can fix things. How's
And
that?
you used to write for the
Of
IT
course,
Professionals newsletter as well,
I
which was
did.
great.
I did my time in the IT professionals salt mines. But Peter Griffin and cartoons by Jim have carried on in fine form. So you're well looked after there.
I have. It's fantastic. So you're the CEO of the TCF, or the Telecommunications Forum. Why don't you tell us what the TCF is and give us that elevator pitch?
Yeah.
And just pretend that some of the folks here don't know anything about the telecommunications industry and how it's stitched together.
No, that's all right. So we're the industry association. You know, all industries have an association body. We're it for telecommunications, but we're a little bit different to the usual run of the mill. So we're actually mandated under the Telecommunications Act. So the Telecommunications Act 2001 says the government will come up with a policy. They then direct the Telecommunications Commissioner, part of the Commerce Commission, to create regulations. The regulator will then look to an issue and say to the industry forum, and that's us, please come up with a mechanism for delivering that. They'll typically release guidelines. We will develop a code and then take it from there. So it's everything from the purely technical stuff like number portability. So you can take your phone number with you when you migrate, through to the latest round we've had came out yesterday were guidelines around how you market broadband so that customers can more fairly compare and contrast different services. But there's all kinds of stuff in there. We do vulnerable end user code so we can look after people who may need extra support when dealing with telecommunications providers. We've got disconnection codes for getting rid of old technologies like copper, and we'll get on to 3G, of course, and a whole raft of other things. We also run what is known as the sector coordinating entity for telecommunications. Okay. So in the event of a big event like a cyclone or an earthquake, all of the different sectors have a sector coordinating entity that brings everybody together. And we do that for telco. We have the Telco Emergency Forum, and we'll do everything from coordinating generators and cell sites on wheels being moved around to fuel supply runs, and also engaging with the government, with the minister and the ministry around what needs to be done to bring networks back up or support people in risky areas. So yeah, it's quite a broad remit. We've got a huge team. There's myself. Kim is my only employee, and she looks after some policy work 4 days a week. We have a secretariat led by the indomitable Claire Dobson, who does all the actual work of setting up all the meetings and running all the events. So yeah, we are this quasi-regulatory kind of industry representative model. Yes,
Wow. And
quite
yeah,
unusual.
you certainly punch above your weight with such a small team. I'm really impressed. So
Thanks.
now we've got the
Yep,
background stuff sorted. We know where we stand. We're here to talk about the 3G network shutting down. So at a high level, just tell us what's happening, why
yep,
it's happening, and
yep.
when is it happening?
Cool. So 3G, for those who don't know, is the third generation of mobile network technology. The first generation was analog phones. They were a little better than your cordless phones in the kitchen, but with a very powerful antenna, so you could talk to people a bit further away. The second generation was 2G. You remember in the early days with mobile phones in New Zealand, you could finally text each other. That's the 2G network. That is the basis of the technology family that all mobile phones use these days. 3G came along in the early 2000s and arrived at a time when the iPhone was launching in New Zealand. So 2009, I think, is the date. That has since been superseded by fourth generation and fifth generation, 4G and 5G. And the reason we're switching it off is twofold. One is the technology's end of life. Nobody supports it anymore. They've all moved on to the newer technologies, so it's becoming less and less stable. And secondly, customer demand is so great for faster connections in more areas, and some of the smart stuff that 4G and 5G does that 3G does not. That means it's becoming more of an impediment than a value add. So what we'll do is we
Right.
will switch it off, reuse that spectrum for 4G and for 5G where necessary, and provide better service using those devices. And in terms of timing, the three mobile network operators, the MNOs, Spark, 1 and 2 Degrees, they've got slightly different plans, but by the end of this year, all three of them will be switched off. So think about aiming for October as a cutoff point. They'll make a decision then whether they keep it running over summer or switch it off for, it depends how we're tracking. So yeah, by the end of the year, it'll be gone. We'll join dozens of other countries, including
Mm.
Australia, which switched off late last year. So already people with 3G devices, if you're traveling overseas, you'll find that in a lot of places, your phone just won't connect because there's no network for it to connect to.
So we're talking about a network that's old, right? So I read somewhere that one estimate that only 5% of their network traffic is 3G, and Spark estimates it's 4%. I don't know what 2 Degrees is. Overall, network wise, how many New Zealanders are dependent on 3G for either their phones or their internet connection or their medical devices or their smart meters,
Mm.
all of that kind of technology that uses that network? What's the
Well,
scale of it?
it's depends how you look at these things. So at the moment, 100% of New Zealanders with a mobile device use 3G. The
Yeah.
network's there, it's operating. People don't generally select what network they're using. They just let the phone decide. So you'll quite often find your phone connecting to 3G where there's nothing else available, or 2G even. The other day I saw Edge appear on my phone as the connection. I haven't seen that for a very long time. That's kind of 2.5 or 2.75 G. It was an early version. So today everybody's using 3G. And our aim is that by the time we get to switch off, everybody knows they've got to make a decision about auditing their own needs, find out what it is you need. If you're comfortable with a phone that only connects to Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, that's fine. If you decide I need to upgrade or move on, that's fine. For some people, it'll be about changing the settings on the phone. We'll have to talk about this. There's a little gap in the middle of phones that are 3G reliant for voice. And we may be able to just change some settings and you'll be off and running again. So it's a little hard to tell how many people are dependent on 3G because everybody uses it at the moment. What we won't see is a steady decline in numbers leading up to the drop-off point. So this isn't the
Right.
first time we've switched off a network. 2 Degrees switched off 2G about 5 or 6 years ago, and I was involved in that project. Telecom famously switched off the 025 network all those years ago. So you had a whole, I mean, half the country was using 025 as their mobile range. That was a different technology family, and they decided we won't follow that one. We'll switch over to this family that we're part of now. And I can tell you, on the day of switch off, there are still a considerable number of people using the network. They won't switch until the network's not there, and then they go, oh well, I guess I have to do something now. I don't buy my Christmas presents early. I'm a Christmas Eve shopper. I suspect quite a lot of people are. So we will see a lot of people staying on 3G right up to the
Okay.
bitter end. Yeah.
I just want to remind everyone who's listening to this, if you want to ask Paul any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A and I'm happy to relay them. You've opened the door here on my next kind of set of questions, which are really coming from the digital equity lens. I heard you speak recently on the radio about an $80 handset you can buy from the supermarket. For some people, $80 is more than their Kai budget for a week and simply not affordable. And I know that in Australia, there were schemes funded by industry, community, and philanthropy to help provide replacement handsets at no cost for vulnerable people. Do you know if anything like this is happening here in Aotearoa this year?
Yeah, absolutely. So while I speak on behalf of the telcos, I'm not involved in all their marketing campaigns. That would be a slightly
Understand.
problematic. So I don't know exactly what they've got planned, and I quite like it that way. But I do know that last time around, for example, with the 2G shutdown at 2 degrees, absolutely, there were programs, there were plans in place. The call to action, if you like, the thing you need to do is, first of all, find out whether you are affected. And if your phone is 3G reliant, you may just need to change the settings. You might need a smaller subset of them will need to go and buy a new device. If you're in that category and you've got problems, talk to your telco, talk to whoever it is that your monthly bill goes through, because there are a number of different ways you can approach this. And whether it's the cost of the phone, maybe they can apportion it out over a series of months in the lead up or in the aftermath. There are a number of different ways we can handle making sure that you stay connected, because that's actually, I mean, to put it bluntly, telcos really like people using their networks, and they will help you stay connected as much as they possibly can. So for those people who are thinking, gosh, $80, as you say, even the ones I've seen today, the cheapest I've found this morning was about $50. That's still, it's still a chunk of cash, right, for a 4G device. You don't need to buy a $2,500 iPhone. You can if you want, but there are options that further down the food chain. And I would go and talk to my telco and say, what can you do? What can I do now to start planning? Because you've got time, right? Today is, where are we at? Towards the end of February. You've got until let's call it October, November, somewhere in there to organize what's what. And that might be as simple as putting some cash away or doing what you can. Or, as I say, talk to your telcos about what they're offering.
For a lot of people, even checking those settings are going to be quite hard. So do you speculate that it's kind of what you're inferring is the telcos will have campaigns going direct to customers between now and the end of the year to help them with this?
Yeah. So at the moment, we can tell if you're using a phone that only connects via 3G,
Right.
as in the broadest sense. So it gets a little tricky because New Zealand has a very open market, and a lot of the phones are brought in by third parties, parallel importers, they used to be called, but it's a bit of an old term these days. But you might find that you've got a phone that, according to our records, should be capable of being 4G or 5G. But because you bought it overseas or it's been imported by an international importer, the settings might be wrong for the New Zealand environment. We don't all use, around the world, we don't all use the same frequency ranges. And sometimes you'll have a device that will work fine in Malaysia, for example, but may not operate on the same frequencies in New Zealand. So we literally have to check device by device.
Right.
So the long and short of it is, one of the things we'll do soon, I hope, if you're listening, telcos, soon would be good, is set up the short code so you can text 3G to a short code number, and it will come back and tell you your phone is good, your phone will not work, or more likely, your phone's one of those that we might need to check. So
and then
you can go from there.
We've got a great question from the audience here, Paul, which is
Oh,
what
good.
about embedded devices, like medical
Yes.
devices? How will people know if they need to be
Well,
upgraded?
a very good question. So there are three areas that I'm looking at as part of this awareness program. The first one is straightforward phones and devices in people's hands. Those are easy to engage with because you can send text messages. We have a direct billing relationship with the customers. So if you get an account, we'll have your email address. So we'll be able to email you as well and say you need to think about this. That's already happening. So the telcos are already talking to customers directly that they know are affected. The second issue is one of network coverage, and we'll come back to that, I'm sure. The third one
Hmm.
is these embedded devices. And there are a raft of them because the launch of 3G was really the birth of the Internet of Things. So we had that initial round of, oh, the connected world, everything should talk to everything else. We've seen personal medical alarms, the pendant alarms, burglar alarms, webcams, soil measuring,
Mm,
moisture measuring systems, all kinds of things.
yeah,
And the problem is you can't send them a text message. I mean, you can send it, they just can't read it. And we do not have that direct billing relationship. So I'll give you an example of something that I had never thought about until recently. The lifts, when you pick up the telephone to make a call because you're stuck in a lift, quite a lot of those are mobile. They're not fixed line.
okay.
So they all need to be checked. So I'm doing a session very similar to this with the Facilities Managers Association in a week or so, and we'll go through all of that with them because they need to think about all those things. The way to manage it is you've got plenty of time. So do an audit, check your devices, find out what does communicate with the outside world. Once you've done that, figure out how it communicates with the outside world. And it could be that you have to talk to the vendors, whoever's supplied the unit, whatever it is, and get their input on it. They should be able to provide you with a path. What that is not in our control. So the telcos can't direct them to do anything. If they say, I'm sorry, you've just bought this thing, but you have to buy a brand new one, that's an awkward conversation that they're going to have because those vendors have had more than a year's notice that this is coming.
Right.
So they had known for quite some time that the devices will no longer operate. I've spoken with the Commerce Commission and we'll see if we can't get a reminder sent out to sellers of things that your product has to be fit for purpose for the reasonable period of time, I think is in the Act. If you're still selling devices that are 3G dependent, I think you're on the edge, right? I'd expect something to last a lot longer than 7 or 8 months. So those
Yeah.
people will have to, those organizations will have to address the situation with you. So yeah, the first thing you've got to do is an audit to find out what you've got that actually communicates. And a big part of that is if you find out it runs on a copper connection, then you need to make a plan now because by the end of the decade, which is only 5 years, the copper lines will come out. And that's our next big legacy project. We'll get 3G sorted, but copper lines are being withdrawn all over the country. And when they break, when they reach a certain point with so few customers, they will be discontinued. And everybody will be contacted and there'll be much grumbling, I'm sure. But maintaining a copper line network in the 21st century is just not viable for anybody, and that money should be better spent on fiber and
So we may be back here having another one of
we
these
will,
sessions
I'm
about
sure.
copper. Yeah.
You and me will be back
So
again.
we will. Yeah. Still talking about it. So in Australia, it's, you mentioned Australia a couple of times. They recently closed down, I think it was the end of October,
Yeah,
their 3G network, and they discovered a few issues, which I think is great that we can learn from their lessons. They discovered some coverage gaps in remote areas, some emergency services communications issues, some devices that hadn't been picked up by
yeah,
manufacturers and were still reliant on the 3G network. Can you talk to how New Zealand is learning these lessons from Australia and
yeah.
what, if anything, we're doing differently?
Yeah. Well, everything is the short answer. We're doing everything differently because they made such a hash of it. I think the telcos over there just assumed it would be fine and everybody would know. And towards the end of their project, it became clear that not everybody was aware. The
Mm.
biggest issue is awareness, so that then the customer can decide, what am I going to do, rather than just springing it on them at the end. So there was a feeling that they hadn't done a good job of communicating, and that's why I'm here now. And you'll get so sick and tired of me by the end of the year, because it's all we're going to be talking about. My job is to make sure that everybody in New Zealand knows that this change is coming and they've got to do something, whether it's buy a device or change the settings or check with their supplier, whatever it might be. So that's the first thing, is we have a fully supported campaign of work. The marketing will kick off later in the year, sort of middle of the year. I will be going out to community groups to explain what's going on and make sure they're all aware. I've reached out to not just the geographic ones like the Northland Regional Council, but also the verticals. So Age Concern, Federated Farmers, Rural Women, folk who will actually have a lot of questions about what the impact is going to be. So hopefully you'll be the one to tell me at the end of the year whether we've done a good job of communicating it. But in terms of coverage and devices, we've already started the technical work streams to understand. If I think about devices, first of all, we've got 3G only devices, 4G or 5G devices that also use 3G. But in the middle,
Right.
like I said before, we've got this gap with 3G reliant devices. And there might be phones that use 4G for data, but 3G for voice. And these in the gap phones, there's a terrible technical term, which I refuse to use, but it's VoLTE, voice over LTE. VoLTE, right? So we don't need to say that again. If your phone is one of these, you'll need to either change the settings or get it checked. Might be a software upgrade. It all depends on the device. So those are the ones I worry about, because you might look at your phone and it says 4G in the corner and you go, I'm sweet, but you might not be. And that's what caught the Aussies out. They had a whole raft of phones from the early
Right.
days that they would not make emergency calls on the 4G network because of a configuration in the way the Australian networks have been set up. Now, we've got 3 networks here. They're operated in quite a different way to the Australian networks. My information so far is that won't be a problem here at all because of the way we handle emergency calling. So our emergency calls are treated in quite a different way to the way they do it in Australia. So that should not be a problem, but making sure that everybody is up to speed is. And then that final point around network coverage, that is a big one, because the network operators are going to have a bigger footprint of 4G and 5G than they had with 3G. So they are going for a bigger national footprint of connectivity. But
Yeah.
there will be overs and unders, because I don't know if you know anything about network technology. It's a dark art, and there'll be a street on, at the corner of the street, the house used to get coverage in the front garden, now it doesn't. That kind of thing is absolutely inevitable, I'm sure. And so we will have to wait until the networks are up and running and see what that looks like, and see how they can fine tune the networks to take care of those problems as and when.
Well, I've got one more question for you about networks. Before I jump to the message board, the Q&A is coming in thick and fast.
Oh,
So
good.
I'll just ask you this one more question, and that
Yeah,
is around coverage. So the government have just announced their visa for digital nomads, and I'm expecting that digital nomads are going to want to sit on our most beautiful beaches, climb our mountains,
absolutely. Yeah,
walk all of our great
yeah,
walks. And I know from my experience of doing all of these things around the country, 3G is often the only coverage I can get. So
yeah,
walking Waikato Moana, occasionally you get 3G, otherwise there's no coverage there. For example, I've just been to Northland.
yeah,
There's either no G, as we called it, or 3G
yeah.
in vast parts of Northland. So with these newly imported digital nomads, what's going to happen?
Well, so where your phone says 3G today, it'll say 4G or 5G
Okay.
if depending on who's doing what where. So that shouldn't be a problem. We're not talking about, however, putting cell phone coverage in the most remote parts of New Zealand for a number of reasons, not least of which is the cost. Because building a cell phone tower and providing all the connectivity and backhaul to connect it to the network, providing power, you absolutely can't do that all over New Zealand. We just don't have the population to support it.
But Australia's done it quite well. I've done some
No,
remote walks in Australia and I've
you
had
have.
5G coverage.
Yeah. On the walk, you go left or
Yeah,
right
yeah,
and it's
yeah.
gone. and we
Right.
do that, right?
Right.
So along with the government, the Rural Connectivity Group has been rolling out cell phone towers and other bits and pieces as well, all across New Zealand in rural and remote areas where coverage is necessary for tourists, for example, but the population doesn't sustain
Right.
the commercial business case. We've put up in excess of 500 towers right across New Zealand. But New Zealand is a rather a large country, and a lot of it is vastly empty. And that is the beauty of the place, but also when it comes to putting in place infrastructure, very difficult. However, there is a solution because mobile is not the only game in town. We have fiber, we have fixed wireless, we have mobile, and newly emerging, we have the satellite market. And you'll have seen the press releases from One New Zealand in the last few weeks around coverage and being if you are outside and you've got no mobile signal, you should be able to get a satellite signal to send a text message. Over the next year, that will increase to include voice, so you'll have voice and text. And that's just with one provider. Once you get into the other providers who are talking about coming on stream as well, I suspect we'll have huge amounts of coverage in places that it makes no sense to build
And are
terrestrial.
they price accessible plans though?
No idea. That's a commercial thing.
Yeah.
Mine's free
Yeah.
because it's in the plan that I'm involved with. But if you are going to be remote and in a corner of New Zealand that the cell phone coverage is not very good, take a personal locator beacon. They are cheap and
Mm.
cheerful, and that's the model, right? Don't think I've got a
Mm.
cell phone, I'll be fine. You get yourself something that will work no matter what the
Yeah.
conditions.
It's a good
It,
message.
you've got to be very cautious with them.
Right, I'm going to pop over to all of these questions in the
Okay,
Q&A.
let's have a go.
First one has an acronym in it, so just bear with me.
Acronym for maniac.
Are the MNO online 4G coverage maps a guarantee of mobile service post 3G shutdown?
Absolutely not.
Okay,
Yeah.
explain that one to us.
So the coverage maps you see on the websites are for today. As I said, they are expanding the 4G footprint. They will overlap the 3G that's on the ground today. So those maps will change. So if you're looking at a map today and it says there's no 4G coverage, by January of next year, that'll be well out of date. So keep an eye on the maps and they'll be updated. They're updated
Okay.
monthly at least, I think. So yeah, at the moment, as I say, 3G is still there. So it still shows up on the maps and it still shows up on your phone. You'll have to see what comes of it by the end of the project.
Thank you. Now, there's a couple of questions around community engagement and concerns about specifically rural Māori people who have greater needs.
Yeah.
And so one question is around kind of if you can build on what you've already said about community engagement. The other one is, are there any partnerships with community groups, libraries, or digital equity organisations in place to assist with this transition? So can you just talk to the
Yeah.
intentions around meeting
Absolutely.
underserved communities?
Yeah. So if anybody wants to ask questions about 3G or wants to know more or wants to put together a community session, I will go anywhere in the country and talk them through what the plans are. As it develops this year, we'll have maps, we'll have materials we can share. All of that kind of thing will be made available. The telcos will do the sort of the marketing side of things, the push out to their customers, but we're going to do everything else. We being the TCF, we're going to do all of the engagement with community groups, talking people through, and then making sure that they are supported. So if there is a real need in an area and there is concern, we'll go and get the information and share it with you. We'll be that conduit with the network operators. It is I understand how difficult it is when you look at the phone today and say, well, 3G is all we've got and you're going to take it away. That sounds quite scary. And it's the same with the copper withdrawal, right? There are plenty of people who say the copper line is the only line I've got that I feel confident in. Commerce Commission research shows that there are 97, I think it's 97% of rural customers have an alternative to copper today, even before satellite comes along. So there are choices out there, and a lot of customers just don't know that they exist. And one of the most obvious ones is fixed wireless, which makes use of radio spectrum, but instead of it going to a handset, it goes to a dish on the side of your house or on the side of the cowshed that points to a tower. Once you've got that connection, you'll have a Wi-Fi network at home or on the farm or in the business or whatever in the community. Most phones today, most of the modern phones will use Wi-Fi calling to connect. So you don't need to connect to the fixed wireless network. You connect to the Wi-Fi and it connects to the fixed wireless network. It's a little bit techie, but it means you get connectivity in places you just never would otherwise. So I'm hoping that between us talking to everybody and upskilling them a little bit and also supporting those who need it, we can get everybody across the line come the end of the year.
Can I also make a commitment with my Decker hat on that you can work with our network, with
Absolutely.
everyone who's
Yeah.
out there trying to close the digital divide. It's a network of wonderful organisations.
Yeah. And
So yeah.
that's right. The telco sector is a big believer in digital equity. Each of the telcos have their own programs and their own particular take on it, but everybody's doing something that whatever they can to make sure that everybody can partake in this fabulous digital world that we've created. It's essential. I mean, most government services are best delivered online these days, so you absolutely have to have a connection. Let's not get started, Vic. I haven't got a
No.
glass of wine in front of me to wave at you, so we'll have that
Okay.
conversation though, you and I.
I'm going to get back to the Q&A.
Okay.
Are you or is anyone actively engaging within the health system around the medical devices? So can you just kind of elaborate on what's
Yeah,
happening
yeah.
in that space?
So again, we're kind of one step removed because we don't sell the medical devices. We don't necessarily have that relationship that we can identify somebody and say, "Oh, you've got a pacemaker," and I know that it reports back to the little box by the side of your bed each night, and it communicates. We don't have those relationships, so we have to engage with those enterprise level customers and tell them to go and talk to their customers. So that is happening already. It's absolutely happening in the health space because, as I say, there are plenty of devices that came on stream as 3G started. The one I've discovered most recently is an electric car charging station. You know, those stations you buy for in your house,
Mhm.
plug in, and then you can plug your car in. There was a whole raft of those that came in, and they apparently have a 3G chip in them. And I'm not really sure what they have to communicate, but there they
This
are.
is modern technology. It shouldn't have.
Exactly. How
Yeah.
is that using not one generation ago, but two generation old technology? It's quite odd. But things like smart meters, all manner of beast. And quite often these things are imported by a third party, like a hospital, who say, "Great, we've got this fantastic new technology." They may or may not have the support documentation that tells them. So they're going to have to go, it's a little bit like Y2K. They're going to have to actually go out and pick up each device, have a look and test it to see how it talks. And that's
I'll, I'll, I'll also offer to plug you into the medical device team at the Ministry of Health because
brilliant.
they'd be a good people to talk to because
Yeah,
they know what all the devices out there
yeah.
are, of course. Okay, I've got another technical. This is a really technical question
Oh,
for you from
oh good.
Ivan. Always good. He often gives me hard technical
Ivan.
questions too.
If that's Ivan from
Will
2 degrees, we're going to have trouble, my friend.
Will the dropping of 3G mean that hacking of the phone system signaling system number 7 without any indication to the user of the phone will no longer be possible? So I
Oh,
think
that's a
he's
very good
saying,
question.
is it going to take that back door away?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm not sure about that one in particular, but I do know that the encryption around 3G has long since been regarded as with modern technology, it's easily crackable. You know, when it first came out, it was state of the art. The state has moved on quite dramatically since then, and the older technologies are more vulnerable to modern techniques. So I don't know about that one in particular, Ivan, but that is absolutely something that is one of the reasons why you shut down older networks. They're not just hard to maintain from a physical
Hmm.
point of view, they have security issues. And that was one of the driving forces behind 2 degrees closing off 2G back in the day because it was just deemed to be unsafe.
Yeah, nice. Now, the next question is a great question. This change sounds very reliant on user knowledge and skills or effective community engagement with vulnerable groups. Do you have any recommendations or expectations of the telcos on how this engagement is conducted to check the devices? So, for individuals to check their devices?
Yeah, so it's a good question. The telcos are all doing what they can to reach out and talk to people, but quite often that'll only get you so far. There are a lot of people who will just ignore text messages from their provider or the email that comes through. They may not feel comfortable talking with providers. That's why I want to work with organizations like DECA, with those community groups and the regional groups to make sure that the message is heard on all the channels so that everybody knows this isn't something to be afraid of. We can actually just help you through all of this. That's really, for me, that's the key plank of the work we're doing this year, is to try and, because it is largely an information sharing exercise for me. The technical teams, I can't help them, but I can help get the message out there, and that's really what we're trying to do.
Nice. Next question is, have you heard of any other solutions like World Mobile, which are delivering for underserved rural communities in
Mm.
Pakistan, Tanzania, and remote US locations? Is there
I
anything
don't know
like
about.
that here?
Yeah, well, there is. I'm not sure about that project in particular, but that is actually exactly what the satellite era is bringing along. So you will be connected. At the moment, you connect if you're a One New Zealand customer. Ultimately, I suspect they will be a network provider in and of themselves. So you can have a phone that connects with Starlink or Kuiper
Mm.
or Link or Apple, because these big players with that global reach are changing the nature of telecommunications at a fundamental level. That's going to make it very difficult for organizations like the Commerce Commission or MB to try and regulate the sector, because a fairly large chunk of the customer base will be off net in effect. So you could end up with a two-tier network, a two-tier system. Terrestrial networks are highly regulated, prices are maintained and managed, all that side of things that the commission does today that we're engaged with. And then over here, a totally unregulated space where they may or may not have a dispute resolution process. They may or may not enable or support emergency calling because, oh, that's not our business. We don't have to engage with that. We're not paying to support the police call center, for example, because we don't operate in New Zealand. We're just global. And that kind of
Ah,
thing is going to be very challenging over the next few years. And I suspect we'll see a lot of discussion about that as well.
great. That's another can of worms, but back to the questions with
Yep.
5 minutes left. In Aussie, we found that around 5% of 4G capable devices, IoT, mostly fairly remote, failed to connect following the 3G shutdown and have required larger antennas, etc., to connect via 4G. Any suggestions for how identifying these likely issues are in advance of the shutdown here?
Yeah, and that's that whole point around that terrible acronym VoLTE. Some devices use 4G for some elements, but are reliant on 3G for either making the connection or for carrying the voice traffic, for instance. So with those kinds of devices, again, you have to check with your provider. Thank goodness the Australians completely stuffed it up, and everybody's a lot more aware that they need to find out how their own devices work, because that's something that we can all learn from. So if you
Right.
are in a situation where you're reliant on a device and you're not sure, you start checking now, because you've got plenty of time to sort them out and hopefully stay online after the swap over.
Okay, good answer. Next question. Australia has an independent national audit of mobile coverage, presumably to identify gaps and keep MNOs honest. Will there be anything similar here?
Yep, we already do that. The Commerce Commission each year does a study, the Rural Connectivity Study. I think they've had 2 years worth of that now. You can go onto the Commerce Commission site. They have maps, they have coverage, right down to address level. So you can put in addresses and see what's available there. Internet New Zealand likewise has the Broadband Maps website, and that allows you to do something similar. And you can see not just from one provider, but you can see from all the technologies what's available at your location. And I would say again to people, don't forget to switch on fixed wireless as one of the toggles. Make sure that you're looking to see what's available in your area, because there's a lot of smaller wireless ISPs operating in New Zealand. And wherever I go out to the regions, a lot of them are providing connectivity, and people have never heard of them. And they have no idea that it's being delivered via.
And they're amazing
They are
organizations,
so
right?
good. They're so cool.
Yeah.
And they are hyper local. So if you say to your local provider, I don't have coverage on the other side of that ridge line, they'll have a look and say, well, we can put something up here and we'll connect it over there. And if you can do the power, and you'd be amazed what they can do. They're excellent. For those who haven't heard of them, have a look at Whisper.nz, WISPA.nz. That's the WISP Association website, and they've got links to all the regional players.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, last question from the message board, and then I've got one more question before we close if we've got time.
And I've got one for you too.
Okay, this person says, I live in an apartment block and it has 2 lifts which have copper wired phones for emergency calls. With the withdrawal of the copper wire network, and I suppose this is relevant to the 3G ones that are being withdrawn, who is going to foot the costs for upgrading these lifts? Is it the manufacturers? Is it the telcos? Who's responsible here?
The responsibility lies with the building owners. They're offering the service. They need to make sure that it's going to work. So it depends. I imagine it will depend on the facility in question. Whether if it's an apartment building and it's owned by one organization, they'll have to sort it out. If you own your own apartments but pay a share of the
body corp,
the body corp, they'll have to figure it out. All of that kind of thing is it's a very good question to ask, right? Because this is going to be an issue for all of them, and everybody, I'm sure, will be.
Well, so everyone on this who lives in an apartment needs to ask: is the phone in the lift 3G?
Yeah, 3G or copper, and don't wait.
Yeah, or copper.
If it's copper, and they say we don't have to worry about it. Start thinking about it now before you need to, because 5 years is the end of that project, not the start of it. They will switch. They'll be done by the end of the decade. Yeah.
My last question, which hopefully you can answer really quickly before you ask me one, is what's going to happen to all this old kit when it gets taken out?
Brilliant, because that's what I was going to say to you. So my request to everybody, whether it's a 3G device or not, whether it's a old handset or anything you've got lying around the place, I have a little collection down here myself. Please, please, please recycle them. Go to the Remobile website. We have about 400 to 450 locations around the country where you can drop off your old equipment. Make sure you wipe the brain, factory reset the thing, take the SIM card out, but recycle them. And you can take your old cables and plugs and whatnot and stuff them in as well. We'll even post you a Post-it bag if you want to just send it back. But do not chuck rubbish. Recycle them. It's essential. Remobile is the name of the program. So have a look online and you'll find out more details there.
Right. Perfect. You already knew the answer to that question. So that's excellent. And just for everyone who's listening, if they want to find out more, get a hold of you, what other websites do you need to tell them about?
The obvious one is the TCF website, tcf.org.nz. There's a page on 3G shutdown, and we'll be updating that constantly as new information comes through. As I say, contact your local your own mobile provider in the first instance if you've got concerns about your devices, and they'll be able to help you out. And my email address is on the website. Drop me a line. I think you'll find my phone number on there. Give me a call. Happy to talk to anybody. If you're a community group and you want to know more, let me know and I'll come and do a presentation to you all.
Thanks, Paul. You're going to be a busy man for the rest of the year with all these presentations you're going to be doing. But well, really do appreciate you taking the time today. Thanks everyone who's been here and all the great questions. There are a whole lot of other rabbit holes we could have gone down, so maybe we'll save those for another session. But thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your days. Ka kite anō.